One. Hello, hello. My name is Enrique Palafox, and I'm here with Dacre Stoker. Dacre, how are you?
I'm doing great, Enrique. Great to see you again. We've been doing this for a while. We're at week number 18, is it?
18. This is the 18th week.
Yeah, the action in Dracula is really picking up. You know, one of my favorite guys who has really lived on beyond Dracula as a character in his own self. You know, it's cool that Bram created not only the Count, but Van Helsing, that has taken on a life of his own. But this is where he makes his appearance.
Actually, if you think about it, Dracula as a character is a very secondary character. I mean, he is the most notorious one, but he remains always in the shadows, and he has like four lines of dialogue in the entire novel. So Van Helsing is one of the greatest characters, and I'm so glad that he appears this week.
Yeah, and he's an interesting guy, because we find out when we start looking at the letters and the description by his friend Seward, the connection that he used to be the teacher of Seward, but he was also a lawyer, a metaphysician, a doctor, as we know, but he's also very well-rounded in the occult, very philosophical as well. So yeah, let's get on with this, because we've got a lot to talk about here.
Ok, bienvenidos, esta es nuestra semana número 18, estoy con Dacre Stoker, vamos a platicar de esta semana, estuvo muy interesante porque bueno, aparece uno de los personajes favoritos que es Van Helsing, y bueno, pues precisamente vamos a entrarle de lleno porque en términos generales esta ya se empieza a poner sumamente interesante, ya que bueno, la aparición de Van Helsing entra como uno de los personajes principales, dejando al conde un poco de lado en las sombras. Ok, Dacre, let's do this.
Yeah, so, you know, again, a lot of letters back and forth at the beginning between Arthur Holmwood and Dr. Seward. I want the people to realize that these locations that Bram has used, the Albemarle Hotel, the Great Eastern Hotel, all of these are real places that are being used where the letters are going back and forth. But we begin to see Arthur is very naive. He has no idea what's going wrong. He notices that Lucy's mother is still ill. His father in this chapter gets sick, and he's trying very hard to bring his friend in, Dr. Seward, to go to Hillingham, which is the house where Lucy lives with the mother, to try to diagnose her. He realizes that Seward has been a very good friend, and he says, this is going to be difficult. We have a friendship, but I'm also a doctor. And that begins a bit of a struggle to diagnose her effectively. She begins to say, you know, she's hiding this. She doesn't want to show her weakness. So it begins to show she's not just, you know, this floozy lady that is more interested in having 3 lovers and 3 suitors. She is really trying to be tough and not show her mother that she's ill, because she knows this is going to make her health worse. But she finally lets down her guard when she opens up to Seward and tells what really is going on.
And this is great because Bram took his time to develop Lucy as a voice in the novel, so we can be sure what she was thinking in this process that you are mentioning.
Exactly. And we do get something you mentioned earlier. To me, this is very medical. There's a lot of medical terms, medical processes that are being introduced both by Seward and Van Helsing, and not just the physical medical, but the mental, psychological as well. And here is where I keep having to repeat this, and I'm sorry, but you know, Bram did get so much of this information to put in the book from Thornley Stoker, who was the head of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland, was knighted, very famous doctor. His two other brothers were doctors, but we don't really think that they gave too much information to the story, because we actually see Thornley's writing in the typescript and in the notes that he's told Bram this stuff. So when we read here about Seward diagnosing anemia and the little trick about getting some of Lucy's blood from a broken window, and so Seward can do a test to figure out, no, her blood's okay. You know, these are cool little tricks that I'm sure, just like you and I are talking today, Bram is sitting down with his brother.
Yeah.
Do you think we can do this? What's a good way? What's a mystery?
Yeah, I love this. Let me translate this. Aquí entramos a un periodo muy interesante porque, bueno, pues ya viene entendemos a Lucy como un personaje central que tiene una voz que nos va contando todo lo que ella va sintiendo, todo lo que ella va soportando, porque bueno, finalmente ella se tiene que hacer la dura y tiene que dejar de ser la chica banal que está interesada en tener novios para hacerse un poco la fuerte, porque bueno, ella sabe que su mamá no puede soportar este tipo de cosas. Entonces, ella también está pasando por un proceso personal muy interesante que Bram nos deja verlo al crear al personaje y meterlo como entradas de diario. Por el otro lado, bueno, pues ya veremos las cuestiones que son netamente médicas, que aquí es sumamente interesante porque otra vez Dacre nos recuerda una y otra vez que el hermano mayor de Bram Thorley, que era uno de los médicos más importantes de su tiempo, que fue hecho caballero, ¿no?, por la reina, porque bueno, pues tenía un conocimiento brutal, no nada más de la parte física, como de la física, sino también mental. Entonces, tuvieron seguramente estos procesos creativos donde se sentaban a platicar y echar ideas, y entonces Thorley le decía, no, pues por aquí, por allá, y entonces Bram tomaba nota, fantástico, de cosas que son netamente reales. Y entonces, bueno, pues vemos otra vez un realismo absoluto avalado por una, pues una eminencia médica. Entonces, bueno, pues mejor no se puede poner. This is as good as it gets. This is as real as you can be. I mean, in those days, you can have video cameras to record the moment, but to have these notes, to have this, yeah, I mean, this is so real.
It is, and especially the place right here where Seward figures out, he says, the blood must be normal.
Yeah.
She's losing blood. The blood itself is normal, therefore it must be mental, which is something that people did in the Victorian era a lot. If they couldn't explain something, it's a mental problem. And then they really don't know much about it, but they, you know, put the people in jail. Yeah. They give them, put them in an asylum. They give them a straitjacket like Renfield, padded room, and give him morphine, laudanum, so they're no longer a problem. But we also have to remember that after Seward says it might be mental, Lucy says, oh, and I've had a problem with sleepwalking. That was back in Whitby. I don't have that problem anymore. Remember, sleepwalking in the books that Bram was using in his research was a sign of mental kind of possession, demonic possession, just as you mentioned in our last segment, that we remember that Lucy, physically, there is blood loss. They don't know where it's going yet. But this vampirism is a possession that Bram is using, and slowly her body is being taken over. And these guys don't really know what it is yet. They have to then call in the expert, Van Helsing. And when we see that Seward has to tell Homewood, trust me, this is a guy that I knew very well in the past. He was a teacher of mine. He's in Amsterdam, you know, in those days, even modern transportation. A telegram, come over in a ship fairly quickly. He gets over here, and we see this guy come into the picture, and his description, he is a philosopher. He is a metaphysician. He is the most advanced scientist of his day, and I believe an absolutely open mind. Now, those things are really important, because you know what that does? That also describes Bram Stoker and thinking of what is the right type of person to solve these problems. Bram was a philosopher. He was the head of the Philosophical Society of Trinity. He was also an open-minded person. He was a Freemason. He listened and thought things. So he's inserting some of his brother in here, I believe some of Arminius Vanbury, but also himself into the traits of the right type of person to diagnose this vampiric takeover, this possession, and the blood loss.
Wow, wow, this is amazing. Ok, aquí tenemos sumamente complejo porque, bueno, pues es la creación del personaje de Van Helsing, que Van Helsing en términos generales es el que viene a responder con todas estas cuestiones que no tienen una explicación. Recordemos que en el pensamiento de la época victoriana, si las explicaciones no eran físicas, entonces se iban hacia lo metafísico, hacia lo mental. Entonces, si no se entendían, pues se cerraban a los locos y demás, se les daba morfina y se les daba ese tipo de cosas, pues para más o menos controlarlos. Pero precisamente aquí es donde se pone muy interesante, porque Seward en algún momento reconoce que los signos que está viendo lo superan a él. La simple medicina no es suficiente, y entonces llama al amigo Van Helsing, que en ese entonces las comunicaciones de telégrafo ya se podían dar de manera pues bastante inmediata, ¿no? Casi de un día al otro. Entonces eso permitió que llegue Van Helsing, pero Van Helsing entra porque no nada más es una eminencia física, ¿no? De doctor, que es como lo vende Seward a Arthur. Le dice, oye, este tipo es una eminencia médica, pero también es abogado, pero también es metafísica, pero también. Entonces, bueno, aquí tenemos un constructo de personaje muy interesante, porque el mismo Bram otra vez se inserta en la novela, porque recordemos que mucho de lo que es Van Helsing es el mismo Bram, ¿no? Recordemos que Bram fue masón, Bram fue filósofo, Bram tuvo una serie de cosas que lo vemos reflejado otra vez en Van Helsing. Wow, this is pure gold. I love this kind of mysteries between masonry, I love it.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a very interesting and small piece, almost like a little Easter egg, we call it, that is slipped into this passage I'm going to read to you right now. And it's one of these things that Bram does a lot in the story, and you don't notice it till maybe the second or third time you read the story. Mm-hmm. I describe Dracula sort of as like an onion. When you take off the layers and read it more and get deeper, you learn more. Yeah. And one of the things we learn is the relationship between Seward and Van Helsing, mm-hmm. that goes way, way back. Mm-hmm. But also, Bram makes it more of a mystery, because what he does is he has Van Helsing speak with this Dutch Germanic accent. Mm-hmm. He loves his dialects. He likes to get things authentic, but it makes things difficult for the reader to easily understand it the first time, yeah. Which can be frustrating. But if you just take it easy and read it, maybe read it a second or third time, it makes more sense. Okay. So let me read this to you, and I'm going to read one sentence at a time, and you translate it. So you'll get when I say translate, and then the whole thing will be finished. So
let me translate this so we can calculate. Okay. Aquí tenemos algo interesante, porque bueno, la lectura de Van Helsing puede ser un poco pretenciosa, porque él en su afán de ser auténtico maneja muchos dialectos y demás que pueden ser difíciles de leer en una primera instancia. Entonces lo que va a hacer Dacre en este momento va a leer las líneas, y yo las voy a ir traduciendo al mismo tiempo en simultáneo, para que vayamos entendiendo la complejidad del personaje de Van Helsing y que no cause tanta frustración al leerlo. Okay.
This is in the letter from Van Helsing to Seward. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about what you need to tell Arthur Holmwood, basically explaining our relationship, that there's a lot of trust between these two guys, a lot of mutual respect. Mm-hmm. Tell your friend that when that time you suck from my wound, swiftly the poison of gangrene.
Aquí viene la primera línea, que tiene que ver con cuando Van Helsing le dice a Seward que le explique a Arthur cuál es la relación y el vínculo que existe entre ellos. Entonces le pide que le cuente la vez que él succionó el veneno. Okay.
So the poison from the gangrene from that knife that our other friend too nervous, let slip.
Can you define slip so I can translate it better?
Slip. So if somebody is cutting something and he slipped.
Ah, okay. Aquí lo que vemos es sí, continúa la carta. El veneno se supone que viene de una gangrena, esta gangrena que fue extraída, ¿no? Y entonces está hablando del otro amigo que tuvo un corte directo sobre la herida.
So obviously what we're dealing with here is that Seward came to the rescue in medical school when somebody was doing an operation and Van Helsing was the professor, and this guy slipped and he cut Van Helsing, and Van Helsing developed gangrene, and Seward came and cleaned out the wound and saved him.
Entonces la relación es...
Go.
Ok, perdón, la relación viene de, esta anécdota viene de precisamente cuando Seward era alumno de Van Helsing. En una clase uno de los alumnos le corta por accidente a Van Helsing, lo cual hace que él desarrolle gangrena, y entonces de inmediato brinca Seward un poco a ayudarlo, ¿no? Y a salvarlo de esta situación. Esa es la referencia que tiene.
Now, back in these days, they didn't have antibiotics. Gangrene was like death.
Yeah.
And I will tell you something within my family that may have contributed to this. My great-grandfather, who was Bram's youngest brother, was a doctor, lived with Bram. When Bram was working at the Lyceum Theater, George Stoker, Dr. George Stoker, would help Bram with the medical practices of any of the people in the theater. Famous actress, Ellen Terry, got a bad splinter in her hand, piece of wood. Very bad, infectious, and became gangrene. He had to come because she had fever, very sick. He had to come and cut it out, clean it out, put in cleansing. Wow. And she gave him a small silver cup. Said, "Thank you very much for saving me. And I now have that cup."
Wow.
That's a true story. So it's possible that Bram, he obviously was very aware of this, that he was aware of this situation and decided to, slide that into the story because he really saw it happen.
Yeah, because he has this insight, first-hand insight. Wow. Then again, is one again, we see this kind of insights in the novel. Let me translate this. Sucede que el tatarabuelo de Dacre, que es el hermano menor de Bram y George, también médico, él trabajaba precisamente con Bram en el Teatro Liceo, ¿no? Donde él atendía las cuestiones medicinales de ahí, pero la referencia viene porque recordemos que en ese entonces no había antibióticos, entonces cualquier infección no se podría gangrenar y eso llevaba de inmediato a la muerte. Entonces, precisamente la referencia que ahorita acaba de leer Dacre probablemente venga de una anécdota con su hermano, que es el tatarabuelo de Dacre, donde which was the name of the actress?
Ellen Terry.
Ellen Terry, que era una de las actrices regulares del teatro, tuvo una astilla muy infecciosa de madera, lo cual se gangrenó de inmediato. Entonces el doctor George tuvo que cortarle la mano. Entonces precisamente él le regaló una copa de plata en agradecimiento por haberle salvado la vida al haberle cortado la mano, y precisamente esa copa la tiene ahorita Dacre, y eso demuestra que, bueno, probablemente a partir de ese evento o de ese tipo de eventos es que Bram tuvo esa referencia y por lo tanto otra vez la vuelve a insertar dentro de su texto, demostrándonos que una y otra vez pues es un texto complejísimo donde él está implícito y está lleno de cosas interesantísimas. Okay.
So one more little Easter egg before we move to Renfield and Seward, because Seward's a very busy guy in this section. He's dealing with both Van Helsing and Lucy, and then we go back to Renfield for a little while.
Yeah.
But just before we go, he has to send a letter to Arthur Holmwood explaining what Van Helsing has found. So he goes into detail, but he sums it up in one sentence. And again, I'm going to read this sentence because it's wonderful to understand that Seward doesn't really quite get it, and he really doesn't understand how to explain it properly about what Van Helsing is really saying. And they're talking about, there is no jest, but life and death, perhaps more. So it's like, is this serious? Yeah, it's serious. Could it be life and death? But maybe something else. Maybe something else. We're not sure yet. And so it's only the beginning of this struggle to have Seward keep an open mind about the scientific process. It's either life or death, certain scientific evidence for both. Perhaps more is what Van Helsing is trying to get him to understand. Keep that open mind. There's more to it than meets the eye.
Ok, lo que estamos viendo es a un doctor Seward que está sumamente ocupado en este momento porque, bueno, pues está lidiando, ¿no?, con estas cuestiones de Lucy, de las que estamos platicando, también cuidando la relación con Arthur, pero por el otro lado, bueno, pues tiene esta cuestión de Renfield, que no olvidemos que es algo que lo tiene sumamente ocupado, pero al mismo tiempo aquí viene la confrontación personal de Seward, porque tiene que mantener una mente abierta, tiene que mantener esta apertura, ¿no?, para que no todo está dentro de su control. Entonces hay una frase que viene dentro del libro que es muy interesante porque, bueno, describe que precisamente son cuestiones que pueden ser de vida o muerte o de algo más. Entonces, en esa situación, bueno, pues ya abre la expectativa de que, bueno, puede ser cualquier cosa y que no necesariamente es algo de lo que él va a tener el control.
Just before Van Helsing goes back to Amsterdam, he does his examination of Lucy. He says, and yet there is some kind of a cause. There is always a cause for everything, but I must go home and think. You must send me a telegram every day. So what he's doing is, even he doesn't know right now, but he's got that open mind to say, you know what, there is a cause for everything. There's nothing that's just purely by chance. Let me go back and think about it. And this is when he goes, and it's beautiful because we've got modern form of transportation, the ship to get him back quite quickly to Amsterdam. Telegram, keep in touch. And as we know, this goes back and forth, and he does come back later. Now, right after this, Seward, very busy guy, heads back to his asylum, and he starts checking in on Renfield. And Renfield is developing, again, more of his strange habits. He is moving to eating his flies, moving along in changes in behavior. The behavior is going up and down like a roller coaster. And I feel that after Seward's observations of Van Helsing being open-minded with Lucy, he goes back to his asylum and is more open-minded himself with Renfield. He says, I can't quite understand it, which is saying he's not jumping to conclusion and giving this guy more medicine. He says, I'm trying to figure this thing out. And so his observations in this chapter are very, very specific about, at 5 o'clock I looked at him, he was doing this. He was catching flies, keeping a note of him capturing and making little nail marks on the edge of the door between the ridge of the padding. He's using sugar to collect them. And then at midnight, another change comes in him. Well, the readers know what's happening at midnight, just as we did in the last chapter. That the closer we get to nighttime and the presence of Count Dracula, Renfield is getting more possessed himself and going a little more crazy himself.
Okay. Entonces, aquí vemos a un doctor que, bueno, pues empieza a analizar las cuestiones directamente de Renfield. Y entonces, este es un doctor que tiene que mantener la mente abierta porque bueno, se le permite más la mente abierta con Renfield que con su otro caso, porque bueno, pues aquí tiene estas interacciones donde él además está dando un seguimiento puntual de cuáles son los estados de ánimo de este persona que no casi llega a la medianoche y se vuelve loco. Entonces, bueno, él va haciendo sus anotaciones muy puntuales, ¿no? De todo lo que es los hábitos de Renfield, y claramente se va dando cuenta que hacia la medianoche se vuelve loco. Sin embargo, también estábamos hablando de Van Helsing, ¿no? Que él también es un tipo que se toma las cosas con calma, no apresura pensamientos. Entonces dice, necesito regresar a mi casa, ¿no? Necesito regresar a Ámsterdam para pensar. Sé que hay una razón de todo esto, pero necesito pensar. Entonces es ahí con esta tecnología que ya era muy eficiente en cuanto a tiempos y demás, pues Van Helsing puede regresarse a Ámsterdam. Okay.
So as I finish off this section and explain what I think is motivating or inspiring Bram to write this way, I need to repeat that we have a record of Bram Stoker actually going to the mental institutions and himself talking with these people, okay, talking with mental patients. He wants to understand how they converse. And I think we see it right here. And it's almost eerie that you could imagine Bram sitting down with somebody, may not have the name Renfield, but this conversations. So we see that Seward is actually being sympathetic, like I think Bram would be to a person he's visiting in a mental institute. And he's trying to understand this guy. He's not just pushing him away. Oh, he's a crazy guy, nothing. He is really trying to figure him out. And right at the end here, we see him saying, well, aren't you going to keep the flies? As Renfield throws all the flies away, he says, no, I'm sick of all that rubbish. And then Seward says, he certainly is a wonderful, interesting study. I wish I could get some glimpse of his mind or the cause of his sudden passion. He's really trying to figure out what causes him to go up and down, up and down. And that makes us, the reader, more sympathetic with Seward. You identify with him. He's a guy trying to solve a problem. And the complexity of Renfield. We see not just a one-dimensional crazy guy. We see somebody who is really quite normal. And yes, he does have some kind of a problem, but we don't know what's causing it. But Seward is opening up his own mind to try to get into his mind.
Ya, ok, aquí estamos viendo otra vez los procesos de Bram Stoker, ¿no? En su vida diaria. Recordemos que hay registros exactos de cuando él iba a visitar a los locos al asilo. Él veía, ¿no? A estos pacientes ahí, ¿no? En las jaulas de confinamiento, platicaba con ellos, los veía. Entonces por eso es tan precisos los relatos. Pero por el otro lado hay una sensación de simpatía, ¿no? Que es muy reflejada en el doctor Seward y la manera que trata a Renfield, que es muy probablemente el mismo punto que Bram tenía hacia sus pacientes. Entonces estamos viendo aquí a un Seward que no nada más juzga, que no nada más analiza, sino que trata de ser empático con Renfield y le pregunta, bueno, pues qué es lo que sucede, ¿no? ¿Por qué tiraste las moscas? Y entonces Renfield ahí le dice, bueno, pues yo estoy harto de estas tonterías, ¿no? Porque ya empieza a tener este conflicto que, bueno, pues ya pronto le llevará a un desenlace. Okay.
So now it's my turn to ask you, because the viewers they know that Renfield is one of your favorite guys, your favorite characters in this book. So what is your read on how we're seeing the development of Renfield at this time in the story?
For me, Renfield is like a big step into what is going to happen. And at this stage, he is going crazy, but he start to recover himself some sanity, but he's kind of anger with the Count because the presence of Lucy, because the Count has another point of interest, so he is kind of jealous at some point. So So he questioned his relationships with his God.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good reflection on sort of the master, you know, your allegiance to this leader, and yet he's got somebody else who he's showing more interest in. And it also don't you think it brings up the point, there are blood exchanges going on with Lucy.
Definitely.
Are there any going on with Renfield, or is it just demonic possession?
Yeah, we don't know that, because it is not even a mention of something happening in Renfield's neck, although later Van Helsing managed to recognize the body, but he doesn't mention anything at all. But on the other hand, we have Van Helsing, which I mean, he's kind of a Google of these days. He knows everything, and knowledge is power. And this is very interesting, because without his knowledge, without this folklore knowledge, without these traditions, the supernatural, his investigations, because I mean, it's almost like an equivalent to Dracula. For me, Dracula, and we already discussed this, for me, Dracula is one guy who wants knowledge, because knowledge is power, and achieving this knowledge is that he managed to do this deal with the devil, and then he became like an immortal. Maybe Van Helsing is trying to do the same, because he obviously is a guy who wants to know more. He knows about laws, he knows about medical terms, he knows about the mental illness and that kind of stuff, but he doesn't stop there. He went for the folklore. So the question is, if Van Helsing had the opportunity to take a place in the Scholomance, did he will take it?
That's a great question, because you know he's done the equivalent. He has taken a place in the best educational institutions for all these other degrees that he's got. So the ultimate one, the dark side, would he go to the dark side if he came to it? And I think that's a great way to end this session with that thought that you brought up, and let our readers think about that for next time, to see, you know, who is Van Helsing and what would he do under tremendous pressure, or if he had that opportunity.
Wonderful. Let me translate this. Aquí vemos, bueno, pues a un Renfield que cada vez se vuelve más loco, pero bueno, tiene este conflicto bien interesante, porque llega un momento en que ya empieza a tener, no sé si son celos, pero bueno, hay unos sentimientos encontrados contra su maestro, ¿no? Porque bueno, ya pierde interés, por eso tiene las moscas. Entonces, bueno, en una especie de rebelión, ahí es donde, bueno, tarde que temprano se le va a voltear. Pero por el otro lado tenemos a un Van Helsing que, bueno, también tiene esta equivalencia, ¿no? Del hambre de poder, del conocimiento. Van Helsing es un tipo que busca el conocimiento, lo está buscando en todos lados. Por eso es que, como dice Dacre, ha estudiado en las mejores escuelas. Entonces, un poco la pregunta que traemos aquí a la mesa, y se las dejamos a las reflexiones: ¿qué pasaría si Van Helsing tuviera la oportunidad de estudiar en la escolomancia, ¿no? Él tomaría el lugar, ¿no? Para hacer lo mismo que Drácula. Bueno, pues ahí se queda la pregunta. Y bueno, pues hasta aquí llegamos. Dacre, great week.
Okay, see you guys next week.
See you soon. Muchísimas gracias. Nos vemos pronto. Hasta pronto. Thank you.